Where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Where did you grow up?
Pardon me?
Like, where did you grow up?
I grew up on the west side of Milwaukee.
How many siblings did you have?
I had just one sister.
Was she older than you?
Pardon me?
Was she older than you or younger?
She was older than I was. She was 3 years older. She was a wonderful, wonderful human being.
What languages do you speak at home?
What name?
Languages do you speak at home?
We spoke English. My mother was born in Marinette, Wisconsin. My father came from the Ukraine. My mother was raised in a very orthodox home, but she did not have the religious background that my father had. And it was more or less English speaking.
What was Jewish life like in your town?
Jewish life, while I grew up, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. We associated primarily with Jewish people. I did not have a large religious education. I did try private Hebrew a number of times. I always felt my father, had I been born a boy, would have appreciated it more if I could speak Hebrew. But I was not a good candidate. But I did try very hard.
What is your birthday?
My birthday is August 14th. I was born in 1928.
What type of school did you attend?
I attended the public schools. And I went from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Were there any Jewish schools around? Were there any Jewish schools around while you were a child?
Were there any Jewish
schools?
Well, my friends were all Jewish. My parents' friends were all Jewish. There were non-Jewish girls in my classes that I became good friends with. But away from school, my friends remained Jewish friends. When I was in school, I associated with all kinds of children. But outside of school, I was primarily with Jewish friends.
What were the names of your parents and siblings?
My mother's name was Muriel Brown. That was her maiden name. My father's name was Jack Abrams.
And your sister?
My sister's name was Faye Abrams. When she married, she was Faye Abrams Bernstein. I lost my sister when she was 40 years old in 1965. And I have missed her every day since.
Sorry, that must have been hard. What did your parents do for a living?
When I was very young, my father was a cigar maker. My mother was a homemaker. My father had another lady who was also Jewish who worked with them. They had a little store in West Milwaukee where all the tobacco leaves would come. And they would go through the leaves, pick out the ones that they wanted to use, and did their work with those leaves. I will never forget it. I had never imagined anything like it. I've never seen anything like it since. But it was quite a place to visit.
Did your family belong to a synagogue?
My family belonged to, my grandfather was the shamus. My father's father was the shamus of an Orthodox synagogue called the B'nai Jacob. It was located on 13th and Brown Street in Milwaukee. As my sister and I grew older and we remained on the west side, my parents joined the Temple Bethel because it was more convenient.
What kind of shul was it?
It was a conservative synagogue. We were very, very warmly accepted there. My parents belonged there as long as they lived. My husband and I belonged there for over 65 years. Our children were all educated there. When the synagogue closed and joined another synagogue, I moved from that area to where I am now living. And it was more convenient for me to take advantage of the facilities here at High Point.
What was the rabbi's name?
Rabbi Louis Schwitzko, very renowned rabbi.
Did you have grandparents alive when you grew up?
Yes, my mother's mother was alive. In fact, I was almost a teenager when she passed away. My mother's father passed away when I was very young, and I don't remember him. My father's parents were both alive. My grandmother, Mary Abrams, was the epitome of my life. She was just an amazing, amazing grandmother. And my grandfather, who was the shamus of the B'nai Jacob synagogue, was alive really through my teenage years.
Can you tell me more about your grandfather and what he did as the shamish?
My grandfather was Louis Abrams. He was a very soft-spoken gentleman. He adored my grandmother. He had 8 children. My father was the oldest. They came to this country when my father was 7 years old, and he supported the family by selling newspapers on the street. My grandparents, on both sides, were truly my religious education. My parents were my religious education. I was brought up to raise that everyone is put on this earth to help someone else. And this is what I've tried to inspire in my own children.
Can you elaborate a little bit when you say they were your religious education? My parents were
truly Jewish from top to bottom. They lived Jewishly. And from my observations of how they shared life and how they observed Jewish life is how I learned. And yet I am not as observant as they were. My husband was ultra-reformed when I married him. And although my father was a Kohen, he was a very wise man. And he said to me, your life must be revolved around your husband and your husband's parents. Don't ever worry about your mother and I after you get married. We will always be able to eat in your home, but you must cater to your husband and to your in-laws. And that's what I tried to do.
Did they live near you? Did they live near you?
Yes.
Can you share any memories about like your grandmother on your mother's side?
My grandmother had 3 children, 2 sons and my mother. When my mother graduated high school in Marinette, Wisconsin, my grandmother wanted to come to Milwaukee with the children so that my mother could attend business college. She was very skilled. My grandfather did not want to leave Marinette. But my grandmother moved to Milwaukee with her children. My grandfather remained in Marinette. Now, Marinette had a number of Jewish families living there, and they all took charge of my grandfather while he was alive. My grandparents never divorced. They were separated. My mother did go to business college. She had a wonderful education. She became the private secretary of a very important gentleman who had a piano company. And she was always reaching. She was just a very gifted person and a good person.
Can you tell me more about your early life?
My life? Are you asking me about my childhood or my adult?
Your childhood.
My childhood? I had a wonderful life. I had wonderful friends. I shared my life with a lot of good friends when I wasn't in school. When I was in school, I shared my life doing schoolwork with friends. I belonged to various organizations with other Jewish friends. We didn't have a lot of money, but I was always happy. I'm sure today, experiencing the life I had when I was growing up, one would find it very boring, but I never did. And to this day, I still have 1 or 2 of those friends still alive.
What was Shabbos like in your home?
Shabbos was a very special occasion. My family always had people for dinner in the evening. My mother's and Father's home was open to everyone. Shabbos was very special. Even after I grew up, we would go to Shabbos services at Bethel every Saturday. If it was possible, my father would go Friday evening as well. But it was a time when we knew that it was a quiet period of time. And we enjoyed it amongst ourselves or whoever else would come over.
Did you celebrate any Jewish holidays?
Did I?
Did you celebrate any Jewish holidays?
We celebrated all of them. We never had a sukkah because we lived in an apartment building, and it just wasn't something people did in those days.
Did you have matzah on Passover?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We had all kosher food in our home.
Is there any memories you can share about your Jewish life while growing up?
Is there anything I could share about growing up?
Any Jewish memories?
Jewish memories, oh yes. We shared a lot of Shabbos with my father's family. They lived on North 15th Street, which was off of North Avenue. My grandparents always had a large Shabbos. And I believe on this occasion it was the first night of Passover. And I was asked to open the door for Elijah. And there stood this tall, gray-haired man on the outside of the door. And it just shocked me to no end. I've never forgotten that, never. My grandparents also had a player piano. And when my husband and I made our home for our children, I was very adamant about getting a player piano, and we did.
Can you tell me more about what you did for Passover?
Well, for Passover, we never ate any meals out or in anyone else's home. We always kept the menus in observance of Passover. When I got my first part-time jobs, or I would be in school, I always took my lunch, and every day it consisted of the same foods: matzah, hard-boiled egg, and vegetables. We always found joy, even if there were losses amongst family members. We always tried to find joy in every holiday.
Is there one main memory that stands out about your childhood?
Yes. My father became very ill, and he was working out of state. He always came home on Thursdays to spend Shabbos with his family, and then he would leave again on Monday. This was on a Tuesday night. Our doorbell rang. My mother answered the door, and all of a sudden she screamed. There stood my father. He was not coherent. He did not recognize anyone. He was put on a train by someone that he worked with instructions of where he should be let off. A cab was to meet him and take him to such and such an address. That evening, we had to take my father to the hospital. From then on, he was hospitalized for many months and had many surgeries. They could not find what the problem was. Finally, one day, the doctor said to my mother, and my sister and I were present, that they have tried everything, they've researched everything, there is nothing left for them to do. The only thing that might possibly work would be the use of penicillin, but that was only being used for the armed forces as an experimental purpose. It was not for civilians. Well, all of a sudden one day, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt called our home, asked to speak to my mother. I answered the phone. I couldn't believe my ears. I couldn't even speak. And my mother came on, and the President of the United States, President Roosevelt, spoke with her and said, I understand your husband has been very ill. We received a letter from your daughter, Faye, who is 15 years old, asking for my help. She told me the situation, and I am calling to tell you that Air Force One will be bringing penicillin to St. Joseph's Hospital on 51st and Hadley. My medical team will accompany the medications and the doctor. They will remain for 4 days because they want to observe how your husband reacts to penicillin. Well, on Tuesday, they did arrive and they landed on the roof of St. Joseph's Hospital on 51st and Burleigh. And they administered the penicillin. It was such a happening. It was so unbelievable. This I will never forget. I cannot tell you, after so many years, this was approximately the years of 1940, 1941, and the early part of 1942, that my father was ill. The penicillin was so dramatic that my father went back to work. And although he suffered the effects of all the surgery, he lost the use of his right arm. They removed all of his teeth. They operated on his spine. He was well enough to go back to work. And he took a lot of treatments at the it was a social function for therapy here in Milwaukee, the curative workshop, that was what it was called. And it was a miracle. So when miracles do happen, you never forget them. And they do happen.
Did they ever figure out what the issue was?
All I know is I remember when he returned home that first night, the first thing he did was go in the kitchen and get a bread knife and try and cut his arm off. The pain was so horrendous, and it just spread throughout his body. But they never could localize it. I thank God my whole life for that.
How long did your father live after that?
My father passed away at the age of 68. He passed away in 1968, partly from a broken heart. My sister passed away in 1965, and it was a terrible tragedy. What was the happiest time of my life? You're talking about my youthful life or my whole life?
Your whole life.
I have two of them. Meeting and marrying my husband and having 3 very wonderful children.
What were all their names?
My daughter is the oldest. Julie is her name. She is 65 years old. My son, Jeffrey, he is 62. My son, Daniel, is 59. And of course, my 9 grandchildren and my 3 great-grandchildren. As most Jewish people say, it's their family that's very important to them. Well, they are the love of my life.
If there was one thing you could relive or revisit, what would it be?
One thing to do over? I have no regrets.
In a positive way, something that you could relive.
Maybe I could be a better educator. Maybe I could be more helpful to people. Maybe the times I wasn't so good, I could have been better. But I've had a wonderful life.
Were you involved in religious or other Jewish cultural activities growing up?
Well, I belonged to a Jewish sorority, and I made wonderful friends. I was just always so proud of my parents. I have so much to be grateful for. I was always afraid of being greedy by asking for more. I was so happy, so satisfied.
Can you explain more about what the Jewish sorority was like?
It was a social organization, but we always had a purpose. We found different needs in the city. We always tried to help in many different ways, not necessarily just Jewish organizations, but wherever the need was. And in so doing, it it broadened our friendships. We developed more friends. And we had a larger group of Jewish friends. It really was wonderful.
Did you encounter Passover matzahs, tefillin, or any other religious items while growing up?
My parents had a kosher home. My mother never prepared anything that couldn't be eaten by anyone. Perhaps the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, might have been reluctant.
Where did you get kosher meat?
Well, it was, the Kosher Meat Club was not here in the early years. There was a kosher butcher shop called the Rabinovitz Butcher Shop. And it was owned and operated by three brothers. And that's where my mother got all of her kosher meat. And then eventually the kosher club opened up, and that's where I shop.
What was Yom Kippur like in your family?
Yom Kippur, it was a very moving holiday. It was very reminiscent of all the people we had lost and all the people that Israel had lost. And of course, all our martyrs. We spent, as a child, I spent it mostly with my friends during the day, going from synagogue to synagogue, which was a tradition for young people. As I became older and a teenager, we would more or less congregate at one synagogue. In those days, you didn't have to be a member of a synagogue. The doors were open to everyone. So we would select a synagogue and we would spend our Yom Kippur Day there.
Are there any other childhood or teenage experiences or memories that you'd like to share?
It was hard, although I don't know if it felt hard at the time, but as a child, I knew that there weren't as many Jewish children in my classes as there were other religions. We felt that even in first grade, we were treated differently. We felt that way. As children, in our own language, we realized that and we talked about it. So there must have been a different way of treating us or teaching us than it was for other children. But this is the way it was, so it was accepted.
Can you tell us about your getting married and meeting your husband?
Oh, I was so fortunate. I had such a wonderful husband. We met on a blind date, although I knew who he was. I had just recently broken off with someone that I had become engaged to. And I received this call from a very good friend of mine asking if I would like to accept a date with this fella. And I said, I really don't care to. Well, you should. He's really a fun-loving person. Well, she went on, and finally I said, okay. Okay, so anyways, we went to a play that night, and we went out for a bite to eat, and he was a fun-loving person. We had really a very nice time, and all of a sudden, the food on my plate slid into my lap, and he hit the table, and he said, I finally found somebody that can eat as sloppily as me. Will you marry me? Well, of course, with that I laughed. And he looked at me and says, I'm serious. I laughed some more. And finally I said, you don't know me and I don't know you, and I think we shall just finish our nice evening. Excuse me. Well, the next morning he called and asked if we could go out. It was such a nice day. I said, I think I have plans. He said, no, cancel your plans. I'd like to come and take you for a ride. Well, I accepted. And he really meant it. He asked me to marry him. And I really was taken aback because he was delightful. He was just such a gentleman and so fun-loving. And I said, well, this I have to think about. When I came home and I told my parents, my mother said, just take it easy, get to know him. But by the end of the week, I had decided I would marry him. And I did. And we had almost 61 wonderful, wonderful years. I was the luckiest person alive.
One date?
One date.
That's a score.
And he was a pharmacist. He was in World War II. He was very responsible. He was very patient, very patient. He had so much respect for me. And every single day that we were married, he told me he loved me.
Did you experience any anti-Semitism growing up?
Yes, of course. 2 days before we were married, we had rented an apartment. I think I mentioned it earlier in the interview, or maybe it was before the interview. We had rented an apartment on the west side, and 2 days before we were married, our check came back in the mail to me. And the note said, we didn't realize you were Jewish. And we got married and went on our honeymoon without knowing where we were going to live when we came back. I recall people using the expression, they tried to Jew me down. I found a lot of unpleasantries, yes, once I got out in the world.
Is it important that Jews continue to exist?
Oh my God, yes. Because I think we have a great deal to contribute to this world. And having been to Israel 4 times, my husband wanted to move there. My children cried when we came home and told them. they had not yet reached the age to go there. But it is indescribable. I think Judaism is a wonderful, wonderful way to live one's life. And there have been a lot of people who have converted to Judaism because they found it exactly that way. We have produced brilliant people for this world. I would hate to see Judaism not be part of life. I would never want to see it. I would never want to live if it no longer existed.
What is the most important message for Jewish youth today?
Identify. Identify with who you are. I think that we have to be spiritually, we must recognize all religions. We must recognize all people. But we must be who we are, first of all. And I probably am a little concerned because people don't speak the way we used to speak, because they have been given so many wonderful opportunities in electronics. I think that to know someone, you must talk to that person. And there is not enough conversation. I worked for a company for 22 years after I lost my sister because I knew I was drowning. And I went to work. I was the second Jewish person in this company. Today, the people that I became close to, none of them are Jewish. But they call me, they go to lunch every 2 months. They would never consider doing it without calling me. They observe every Jewish holiday in the manner of when it is and when it falls, so that it doesn't conflict with my religion. To me, I am so honored that they have that much respect for me. And I know that my children have those kind of people in their lives too.
Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end?
No, I'm very honored that I was called to do this. I hope I've been an advocate. I know that it's from the heart. I didn't say anything I didn't believe. And I wish you as much luck in life as I've had. You're a beautiful young lady.
Thank you.